I will say, and again, we're back to that community piece. Hope is found in the community. We often talk about in those early days, let us hold hope for you. In this moment, it may be so dark, it may be so chaotic, you may have difficulty finding hope. So let us hold hope for you until you can find the hope for yourself.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We come to you today with great excitement because we have two of Faithful and True's favorite people and favorite counselors with us today. Chris and Elizabeth Hardesty have given us the go-ahead to have them back as guests, and we're excited about it. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great. Thanks, Randy.
Doing great. Thanks for having us. Yes.
Well, we're excited. We're also here today. We went to great lengths to have our host convinced to come back. Greg, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Glad to be here.
Dr. Greg Miller again is leading the show. So today we've got Chris and Elizabeth here to talk about recovery in the later years of a couple's healing journey, correct?
That's right.
And for those of you that have been listening for a while, you probably are aware that we've been asking people to send in questions and be able to send that to info@faithfulandtrue.com. And this was a question that we got from one of our listeners, was this idea of, we talk a lot about recovery. And so kind of what does it look like, or how is life different later in recovery? So it seems like to set this up, it's probably good that we start with just some clarification of what is later in recovery. What time frame are we talking about? And, one of the questions that we get is, how long is it going to take? And my guess is that is a question that you've heard, and that's also the question that you were asking yourself early on. So how do you address that question of how long is this going to take?
Sure.
Want to take it? Go for it.
Well, okay, so I think, we didn't know how long it was going to take coming in for sure. And I think it became evident to me anyway that it would take, that this is going to take a while. I think just in terms of what we were learning at the workshop, we both did the workshop early on. What we were seeing in couples, I noticed right away, individuals and to some degree couples, but individuals who seemed to be succeeding in the process. There were guys at Faithful and True who had been here a while, 2-3 years in some cases, who were actually doing very well. So I was thinking, I wonder what they're doing that's causing them to succeed. And I started to put that together with maybe some factors that were contributing to that. And some things, at least I noticed, were like a level of motivation. They were highly motivated to get well. They were invested in the program. One of our principles is doing whatever it takes, as long as it takes, whatever the cost. And I could see them doing that as well. And so it became apparent that it was going to take a number of years, probably, for this to really shape up, and that it was going to take a significant investment in resources, time and energy and so forth. So
It was nice to know, I think, just kind of understanding a little bit more of the process, that the amount of time wouldn't always be that point of chaos and crisis. I didn't want to have that phase last for 3 to 5 years. So, it can be a journey that is rewriting and reforming so many things. And that is going to take time, to kind of untangle and unwrap all that you kind of are bringing in to this. But as you get kind of further down the line towards the end of kind of your journey, or at least, the formal journey, it really can be more visionary and more hopeful as you're kind of beginning to look forward.
Yeah, well, and even as we talk about this, when we talk about recovery, we talk about it, that it's this journey that we are on to become the people that God created us to be. So that is a lifelong journey. That when we talk about recovery, it's not just about getting through the chaos or even getting free from the behaviors. It's really about this holistic journey of becoming this person. What's also true, though, is in the early days, there is a lot of chaos. And what we are going to be talking about today is not that lifelong journey, but how long does it take to get some sense of normalcy, or how long does it take to not feel overwhelmed each day by the chaos that's been created by the addiction. And so I would say that when we talk to people in general, we try to give them like a 5-year format, that Typically in recovery, if someone is willing to invest in it and put energy towards it, those first 5 years are very formative. What is also hopeful is it is an investment program. So even in the early days, the more I'm willing to put into it, the more benefit I'm going to see and the less chaos there's going to be. If you pull up on your GPS and ask how long is it going to take to get somewhere, it is typically based on how far you're willing to drive in a day, or how fast you're willing to go, or what the energy is you're going to be putting towards that journey. And the same thing is true here.
Definitely.
So what we're going to assume for our conversation is these are people that are committed to recovery. They're investing a lot of time, resources in order to make it happen. And so with that, just as we continue the conversation, let's just talk a little bit about that first year where there is a lot of chaos. Kind of what is it that people can expect? What does life look like? And then we're going to talk about what we can begin to see life like later on, maybe that fourth and fifth year.
Sure. Well, I think, kind of that first year, I'll speak maybe a little bit from the wife's perspective of what that first year can look like. I think often what kind of gets you in the door is just that point of crisis, right? Either kind of this new information coming out, or just that information piling up over time, where it just kind of reaches its point of being broken. And so when you first walk in the door, I think it's just trying to get your feet on the ground a little bit in terms of what has happened and what is my reality. So I think for the wives, it's oftentimes just understanding, what does grieving look like? What does it look like to have support? How do you begin to take care of yourself, setting boundaries, naming your needs? Those are some of the things that can happen kind of within that first year, just women's workshop, getting involved in a group. There's just a lot of things that can be really essential to really get them grounded and rooted within that first year.
One of the things I would say for the men, and Chris, you can maybe affirm this, is in the early day, and this is probably true for the wives, this is all you can focus on.
Yeah.
Especially if there's been a big explosion, kind of using our language, if there's been a lot of exposure, if there's been a lot of consequences, then the reality is this is where your energy is going. A lot of times men have difficulty focusing on work or focusing on anything else because this is so prevalent in all of what is going on for their lives. So in those early days especially, this could be the entire focus, and it takes a lot of effort just to do something else. I know that Beth talked about the challenges of just functioning as a mom, just trying to get the boys out of the door to school and those types of things, because this can feel so significant in those early days.
I can definitely affirm that. There's no question. I mean, if you come in the door and start to get serious about what you're doing, it does become the focus. I mean, in some ways, it has to become the focus, and so. It is a challenge to juggle some of these other essential things like work and family and so forth. It's important to do that, but at the same time, it's a complete paradigm shift in terms of what am I going to be working on? Where's my time and energy going, for sure? So I can definitely affirm that, Greg. It's absolutely true.
Well, it's kind of the image that I would use. It's like remodeling a house. I don't know if y'all have ever done that. But Beth and I, in one of our homes, we did a remodeling job on the kitchen, and it was just incredibly disruptive. And it was so obvious that we were being remodeled. I mean, furniture was moved and things were covered, and then for a season, things were missing. And you had to accommodate your entire life to the fact that for a while, there was no kitchen. And that kind of is the way that recovery feels like, is that you are trying to remodel this house that you are living in. And there were some significant things that were disruptive by the explosion or the exposure. And all of your energy is trying to learn, how do I live in this new space and function, in this case, without a sink, without a stove, without a refrigerator, and figuring out how to do life in this new way. And we use this term, and I think it's valid, it is incredibly chaotic.
Definitely.
Incredibly chaotic, for sure. And a phrase I heard years ago that I use now in recovery is we have to paint the train while it goes down the tracks. And it just underscores what you're saying, Greg. It is. You focus on recovery while you do the other things that are essential in life, but recovery does become that focus.
It strikes me that you guys had such a big task to not only be working on this recovery, but with 3 beautiful kids. How do you work 3 kids into everything that you're working, the journey that you're on, the focus that you're giving to that?
It was. I mean, one thing I tell the wives is one day at a time, one step at a time. And so I think if I tried to look out too far, like how are we going to navigate this with children? I mean, so many of those things probably I just would have been frozen. Like, I don't know. But you just take it one day at a time and you just figure it out. I mean, we did have a lot of amazing support. My family came down and helped a lot. But this just became the focus. We had to create margin to make recovery happen. Because you could stay busy enough with a lot of things, but it was clear this has to happen.
You kind of mentioned this and you just said it now, but it's the importance of asking for help. Those who seem to navigate the early days of chaos fairly well are those that are willing to ask for help, whether it's from professionals or from community, from friends, from family, because you do need some space and margin to kind of address all that is going on. And in order to do that, you may need some help with the kids. You may need some help with some food. You may need some help in other ways to get some of the foundational things that are necessary for functioning so that those can be taken care of so that you do have energy for this idea of recovery.
It's so true. And I think in couples that we see, individuals and couples that we see have some success here, I think many of them, if not all of them, are asking for help. There's some level of transparency with their support, with their immediate support network around them. So in other words, we often will sometimes see couples who they don't want to tell family what's going on. They don't want to tell people at church or people in their social network what's going on, and they really struggle,
right?
Because they don't get the support. It's interesting. I mean, I think within those folks probably is this belief that there's the shame about the whole situation, but then also I'm a burden, or they're not gonna help me or whatever. But to take the chance to be, you don't have to tell them everything, but to be somewhat transparent about your situation, to give them an opportunity to step in and help.
Right.
And that's creates a lot of success, I think, for couples.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk about at the workshop is this idea of, do you have to have an explosion in order to recover? That was Mark and Deb's story. That's my and Beth's story. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of exposure and there's a lot of consequences. It's like this evident thing has happened. And what is true is you don't have to have a big explosion in order to choose recovery. And the image that I use is like parallel parking. That we live in the city of Chicago. There's parallel parking everywhere. And to be honest, I'm not that good at it. But what I know is if I can have a space and a half, or if I can have 2 spaces, I'm really good because I have literal more wiggle room. I can maneuver in that space. But you don't have to have all that space. You can have a very small parking space and maneuver in there, but every turn of the wheel is important. So for those of you that are listening and there maybe has been a big explosion, there's been a lot of consequences, there's been a lot of exposure, what's happened is you've been given the gift of space. You still have to choose it, you still have to steward it, but you at least have this space that you can choose recovery. And for those of you that are doing what I refer to as stealth recovery, not a lot of people know, there's not been a lot of consequences, there's still a lot of chaos, but you're working really hard to contain it.
Manage it. Yeah.
You can still choose recovery, but every turn of the wheel will be important. And like you're saying, Chris, at some point, you're going to have to get beyond yourselves and start asking for the support. And that's the great benefit of community and groups like the ones that we offer here at Faithful and True. As you have the courage to step into that community, you can begin to find the support. And what ends up happening is you see other people asking for help. They model it for you, and then hopefully in time you can choose to do that for yourself. But being able to ask for help is a significant part of moving you forward on the journey. That question of how long is this going to take? Well, part of the answer is how much help are you willing to ask for?
Yeah, I think we're starting to identify factors that play into how long. It really is a function of these factors, right? So if you're implementing these pieces along the way, then it's you can expect to move the ball forward faster at a pace that we would expect. And the opposite is true as well. Like if these factors aren't in place, we see a lot of people spin their wheels, and oftentimes these factors that are contributing to that.
Chris, when you mentioned earlier that you observed men that seemed to be making great progress on their own, and you thought to yourself, I need to emulate some of these behaviors. Were you immediately able to jump into those shoes to try to do some of those same things that you were observing?
I think the key there was just getting curious about what they were doing. And then to Greg's point about community, just stepping into that and going to coffee with somebody and asking them questions. You know, what's created this platform for success for you? Like, what are the factors for you? And so frankly for me, that required a lot of vulnerability and just getting out of my comfort zone to start those relationships and have those relationships and ask those questions. So I think a lot of it I had this inherent desire, an innate desire to be well, but I wasn't sure how does that happen. It was this enigma, and so asking people who've been successful. You know, I started to learn some things and started to emulate a few things, and then it actually started to work. You know, so it was a lot about community and the support and the guys who were just open to kind of share with me what they were successful in and how they were successful.
You said a word I just want to dwell on for a second. You mentioned the word curious. And I think that is such an important word. And just, you know, something that I think that I came in with as well was just maybe this curiosity of, what is this place? What is this thing called recovery? What is this thing called therapy? I mean, there were so many things that I just didn't know. And two other words I think that kind of strike me are humility and hope. And I think those three words, you know, humility, hopefulness, and curiosity were a big part of, I think, what I came in the door with. Recognizing, yes, I'm bringing in a lot of pain and a lot of chaos and crisis through what Chris's choices were. And a humility to explore my own journey, my own story, my own grieving, my own pain that I had to work through, but also a curiosity and a hope of, I believe this is going to lead me somewhere. There's something here for me.
You know, there are two questions that I think help define this experience, and the first one is, do I want to be better? And the second one is, do I believe I can be better? You know, and one is about desire and the other is about possibility. And I may want to be better, but I don't believe it's possible, and that will keep me stuck. Or I may believe it's possible to be better, but I don't desire it, and that will keep me stuck. So being open to believing that I can be better and I desire to be better, that is the combination that will move us forward. Well, we're kind of talking about that motivation, that moving forward, but there is another piece, and that is stalling on the journey. You know, if we're using the image of a car, you know, going across the country, there are times that the journey can get stalled. And even in your own experience or working with individuals and couples, what do you see as some of the factors that contribute to the journey getting stalled?
Anything off the cuff?
I have some thoughts. I want to give you a chance.
And you know what's
Coming up with
interesting
nothing here.
is I've often heard Beth say that many times one of the things that is difficult for the wives is that they see that their husband's journey has stalled. You know, they come to the workshop or whatever they did to initially get support. They're excited. They're doing the things they need to be doing. And then at some point, it starts to stall out and they start to become concerned. So what do you see, Elizabeth?
And I think to that point, yes, I think that does happen a lot. I was going to kind of give you a chance to talk about what does that look like for the men, but I'll speak from the women. I think that, you know, what I often will point to the wife then is, what can you continue to choose to do, right? I mean, I think there can be such a focus on what's happening over there, what is here, isn't he doing, and then they're responding and reacting to that versus, okay, like how do I release that and continue, you know, pouring into this journey for myself. And so I think that can happen a lot, is kind of that focus on our husband's hoop.
I think it just to kind of dovetail into that a little bit is what portion of the journey is stalling. So we take the way, and you guys have heard this on the podcast before. I mean, we really look at this as his journey, her journey, and the couple's journey. And so what portion of those three, what combination is stalling out? So sometimes we'll see a guys do really well in recovery, but the stalling might be happening over with the wife, over on in the wife's domain, or vice versa. We might see her she comes and she just takes off, but he's stalling. One thing we know for sure is that the couple, if one or both of them are stalling, the couple is going to stall for sure.
Yeah.
But if both of them are really starting to kind of fire on all cylinders and really take off, then we see that usually we see that couple's component will take off. But there are things there that start to get in the way too. We talked about painting the train while it goes down the tracks, and so we see couples that, okay, they've done well individually because they've created the space for that, and yet then we bring a couple together for kind of a reintegration process, which is a process, not an event. But we see that there are all sorts of barriers that can be in the way of that couple's integration, i.e. kids and just life in general. Whatever, it might be a job situation, who knows what. It might be an illness even that comes up, just unforeseen circumstances. And so, all of those types of things can kind of get in the way of progress, I think.
I think a couple of things that we can see we talked earlier about kind of that motivation. And I think sometimes along the way you start to see that it does become evident that there was more of an extrinsic motivation. There was a motivation to do this for the spouse or for your children or for whatever, your reputation. And I think at some point that starts to reveal itself. And that can cause a stalling is I don't have that internal drive anymore. And so that can cause stalling sometimes. Stepping away from community, I think, is something that we see often where there's kind of this belief that I've got this now, I can do this on my own, I don't really need that support. And even if it's not a formal group at some point, there is still that belief we have of continuing to pour in and have people around you who know you in this life.
That's one of the key ideas here, I think, is that we at least our view is we don't expect people to come and be in therapy forever. The idea is you come here and you learn it's a microcosm of what life could be like outside of Faithful and True. Ideas like community and then we sort of, as Debbie says, we take the show on the road, and so we leave Faithful and True at some point, hopefully, and then in doing that, everything is shifted, and we have community, and we know we have the things prioritized that are going to keep us from stalling, down the road.
One thing that I can see is sometimes I am committed to recovery, things are going well, and I start to become complacent. It's kind of like you're given an antibiotic and you're supposed to take the full dosage, but you take it for a couple of days, you start to feel better, the symptoms go away, and you quit taking it because it did what you wanted it to do, and that was to take away some of the pain and the chaos. And for many people, their initial motivation for recovery is desperation. And in time, that desperation will begin to fade. And if I don't replace it with desire, then I will fall away from recovery, because there's less chaos, there's more order, things are better. My wife is less angry, she's more connected, we're less distant. So I get just enough that I become satisfied, and this is good enough, so I fade. But what we know is, kind of like with the antibiotic, if I don't take the full dosage of it, that infection will stay and will come back in some other form, and then the symptoms are going to show up again. And so a very kind of vulnerable place in our recovery is when things do start to get a little bit better, there is less desperation. That's when we begin to walk away and maybe our recovery can stall.
I totally agree.
I think that's where we need people, ahead of us on the journey too, who show us what does it even look like beyond good enough is okay, right? Because I think it's just natural for many of us, like, okay, well, we're better now. The pain has subsided, and so we can just start coasting here. And so I think that's where it was so helpful for me to have women, Debbie, Susie, other women in my group who were further down the road, and they were showing me something so different than just kind of this place of no more pain. Like there's something that transformation that kind of lies beyond if you just continue to push into this.
Yeah. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to go on a backpacking trip with a bunch of guys. And what I know is on my own, I would have quit much earlier. There was one day that we did like 14 miles and I was ready to quit earlier. But because I was with a group of guys, because I wasn't alone, because there was this vision of where it was we were trying to get to, I was able to stay on the journey. And I think we can have this tendency of underestimating the significance of wise voices in our lives, especially in those times when we want to give up, when it is too difficult, when we're not getting the results that we thought we were going to get, to have those other wise voices encouraging us and casting a vision that there's something more. There's kind of like what you were saying, Elizabeth, just the presence of the other women and the way they were experiencing life. There was something that was an invitation for you in that, and you wanted to hear that invitation.
Yeah, just keep going.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that kind of brings us to this idea of what can we look towards down the road. One thing I want to say before we kind of look towards further down recovery is even in the early days of the chaos, even in those early days of pain, there are still glimpses of hope. And there are still good days. A lot of times people hear this time frame of, this may be a journey that can last for 5 years, and they just get overwhelmed because they kind of ask, do I have to wait for 5 years for it to get better? And the answer is no. Even in those first weeks and months, there's God's grace that shows up in a variety of different ways that is significant and meaningful. And in that, that good day or that good moment, there's that invitation to continue. So for those of you that are early on, maybe you're in that first year that we typically identify as chaos, there is still glimmers of hope that you will experience in those early days.
Can I just speak to that?
Yeah.
I think this is where we talk a lot at Faithful and True about the both and, right? And I think that both can be true. At our women's group, we check in with what is something this past week that has brought you passion or just a spark of joy. And, when you have a woman coming in here in the midst of crisis and chaos, it feels like kind of a cruel question to ask. And yet both can be true. They can check in with some really hard, devastating feelings, and they can really have a moment where God showed up for them. And they just had a spark of knowing that he's there, they're loved, being out on the golf course or whatever it may be, where there is just this hope in the midst of some really dark days.
And we're coming out of time for this one.
We are.
But I will say, and again, we're back to that community piece. Hope is found in the community. We often talk about in those early days, let us hold hope for you. In this moment, it may be so dark, it may be so chaotic, you may have difficulty finding hope. So let us hold hope for you until you can find the hope for yourself. Okay? Well, thanks. And as we've said, we're going to continue the conversation and look specifically at, so what can we anticipate in some later years of recovery?
You said it all. We want to thank you for joining us on the Faithful and True podcast. We want to thank Chris and Elizabeth Hardesty. And as Greg said, we're hoping that they will stick around because they have got great wisdom to share with you, great experience to share with you, and a story that you're not going to believe that we touched on in the last Faithful and True newsletter. And then if you have not seen that article, you're going to want to join us on our next podcast when they share a heart-stopping experience that they had. In the meantime, we would like to thank you for watching our podcast, listening to our audio podcasts. Please visit our Faithful and True YouTube channel. Subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and yet we're really thrilled to announce that our subscriptions have been on a steady path of growth, and we thank you for that. So until we join you again next week, we hope that you will have a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.